Hello everyone. Welcome back to Easy Listening English. Before we begin, I want you to make a small promise to yourself. For the next few minutes, do not worry about grammar mistakes. Do not translate every word into your native language, and do not judge your pronunciation. Just listen, relax, and follow the story. By the end of this lesson, you may be surprised by how much English you can understand naturally. More importantly, you will discover a simple technique that native speakers use every day without even realizing it. Stay with me until the end, because one small habit you learn today could completely change the way you practice English forever. My name is Linda, and I am an English teacher from the United States. Today, I want to welcome you into a very different kind of English lesson, one that does not begin with grammar charts, complicated rules, or long vocabulary lists that are forgotten a few days later. Instead, I want to invite you into a living experience, a journey where English becomes something you feel rather than something you simply study. As I sit here speaking to you, I imagine you arriving after a long day or perhaps at the beginning of a new morning, carrying hopes, doubts, and dreams about your ability to communicate in English. Maybe you have spent years learning the language without feeling truly comfortable speaking it, or maybe you are just beginning and wondering whether fluency is really possible for you. Wherever you are on your journey, I want you to know that this lesson was designed specifically for learners who want to experience English naturally, gently, and effectively. When I was growing up in America, language was something I never had to think about. I woke up every morning, spoke to my family, listened to conversations around me, watched television, and interacted with the world without making a conscious effort. English flowed naturally because it was part of my environment. Years later, when I became an English teacher and started working with students from different countries, I noticed something fascinating. Many of my students knew far more grammar rules than native speakers did, yet they struggled to speak naturally. They could explain complex sentence structures, but when someone asked a simple question, they hesitated. They translated every word inside their minds before speaking. They were carrying an invisible burden, and that burden was preventing them from communicating freely. That observation completely changed the way I viewed language learning. I realized that fluency is not built through endless analysis alone. Fluency develops when the brain becomes comfortable processing language directly. Think about how a musician learns to play an instrument. Reading music theory is helpful, but real improvement happens through repetition, listening, practice, and rhythm. Language works in a very similar way. Your ears must become familiar with the sounds. Your mouth must become familiar with the movements. Your mind must become familiar with the patterns. When all three work together, something remarkable begins to happen. English slowly transforms from a foreign system into a natural part of your thinking process. That is why today we are beginning our shadowing journey together. Shadowing is much more than repeating words after a speaker. Imagine standing beside a skilled dancer and copying every movement as closely as possible. At first, your movements may feel awkward and unnatural. You might struggle to keep up with the rhythm. However, as you continue practicing, your body gradually learns the patterns. Eventually, you stop thinking about every movement individually and begin moving naturally. Shadowing works the same way. You follow the sounds, rhythm, and expressions of English until they become familiar and automatic. Before we go any further, I want you to pause mentally for a moment. Not physically stop reading, but simply allow yourself to relax. Many learners carry anxiety whenever they hear English. They worry about making mistakes. They worry about pronunciation. They worry about sounding foolish. Unfortunately, fear is one of the biggest obstacles to language acquisition. A tense mind struggles to absorb information effectively. A relaxed mind learns much more quickly. So, as you continue listening to my voice through these words, imagine yourself sitting comfortably in a peaceful room. The outside world becomes quieter. The pressure to be perfect disappears. For this moment, there is no test, no judgment, and no competition. There is only you, your curiosity, and your willingness to grow. I often tell my students that language learning resembles planting a tree. The first day you place a seed into the soil, nothing seems to happen. The second day looks almost identical. A week later, you may still see very little change. Yet beneath the surface, important development is taking place. Roots are forming. Strength is building. Foundations are being created. English improvement often feels the same way. You may not notice dramatic progress every single day, but each practice session strengthens neural connections inside your brain. Every sentence you hear, every phrase you repeat, and every moment you spend thinking in English contributes to long-term growth. Trusting this process is one of the most valuable skills any learner can develop. Now I would like you to repeat a powerful thought with me. Imagine speaking these words softly, but confidently. I am making progress every single day. I communicate more confidently. English is becoming a part of my life. Notice how these sentences focus on growth rather than perfection. This distinction matters tremendously. Perfection creates pressure, while growth creates momentum. Native speakers are not perfect. Even professional speakers make mistakes. What makes communication successful is not perfection, but connection. The purpose of language is to share ideas, feelings, experiences, and understanding. Every time you successfully express a thought, you are already using English for its true purpose. As an American teacher, I have witnessed incredible transformations over the years. I have taught students who were terrified of speaking during their first lesson. Some could barely introduce themselves. Their voices shook whenever they attempted even simple sentences. Yet months later, those same individuals were participating in discussions, sharing stories, expressing opinions, and communicating confidently with people from around the world. The difference was not talent. The difference was consistency. They continued showing up. They continued listening. They continued practicing even when progress felt slow. Most importantly, they learned to stop treating mistakes as enemies and started treating them as valuable teachers. One reason shadowing is so effective is that it helps eliminate the habit of translating everything from your native language. Translation often creates a delay between thought and speech. When you translate, your brain performs several tasks simultaneously. First, you think of an idea. Then you search for an equivalent expression. Then you check grammar. Finally, you speak. This process consumes energy and time. Shadowing gradually trains your brain to recognize English patterns directly. Instead of translating every sentence, you begin associating expressions with meanings automatically. This ability forms the foundation of natural communication. I remember one student who once told me, "Linda, I understand English when I read it, but when people speak, everything feels too fast." That experience is extremely common. Spoken English often feels different from written English because native speakers connect sounds, reduce certain syllables, and follow natural rhythms. Through shadowing, learners gradually become familiar with these patterns. Their ears learn to recognize the music hidden inside everyday speech. Once that happens, listening becomes less stressful and much more enjoyable. What previously sounded like an overwhelming stream of noise begins to separate into understandable ideas and meaningful messages. Today is only the beginning of our journey together, but every meaningful journey starts with a single step. Right now, you do not need to worry about advanced vocabulary, complicated conversations, or future challenges. Your only responsibility is to remain present and open-minded. Allow yourself to enjoy the process. Allow yourself to experiment. Allow yourself to be imperfect. As we continue through this lesson series, we will explore ordinary moments of daily life and transform them into opportunities for English growth. We will practice thinking, listening, and speaking in ways that feel natural rather than forced. And now, as our first session gently reaches its conclusion, I want you to imagine standing at the beginning of a beautiful new day. The morning sunlight is slowly entering through a nearby window. The world feels calm and full of possibility. Your mind is more relaxed than before, your confidence is slightly stronger, and your relationship with English has already begun to change. In our next lesson, we will step directly into that morning environment together. We will walk into a small kitchen, prepare breakfast, observe simple daily actions, and discover how English can quietly weave itself into the fabric of everyday life. The journey has begun, and I am excited to take the next step with you. Morning sunlight slipped quietly through the kitchen window, casting soft golden patterns across the countertop as I reached for my favorite coffee mug. The house was still peaceful, and for a few precious moments it felt as though the entire world had paused to enjoy the calm beauty of a new day. I have always loved this time of the morning because it offers a rare opportunity to gather my thoughts before responsibilities begin demanding my attention. As an American teacher, I often remind my students that language learning does not have to begin with textbooks, grammar exercises, or complicated study plans. Sometimes the most powerful lessons emerge from the simplest moments of daily life, and this quiet kitchen was about to become the perfect classroom. The air carried a gentle freshness that seemed to encourage slow and thoughtful movement. I walked toward the counter and began preparing breakfast, while allowing my mind to remain fully present in the moment. Many people move through their morning routines without paying attention to what they are doing, but I have discovered that awareness is one of the greatest allies of language acquisition. Every action can become an opportunity to think directly in English if we train ourselves to describe reality as it unfolds. Instead of letting random thoughts occupy my mind, I deliberately focused on the objects around me and the actions I was performing. I picked up the kettle and filled it with water, then quietly narrated the action to myself. I am filling the kettle with water. The sentence was simple, yet simplicity often hides extraordinary power when it comes to language learning. By connecting English directly to a real action, I was strengthening a pathway inside my brain that required no translation. The more frequently these direct connections are formed, the easier it becomes to think naturally in English. As the kettle began warming on the stove, I reached into a cabinet and selected a coffee mug. Once again, I described the action exactly as it happened. I am taking a mug from the cabinet. Some learners believe that practicing such simple sentences cannot possibly improve fluency, but years of teaching have shown me the opposite. The foundation of natural communication is built through countless small moments where language becomes attached to everyday experience. The kitchen remained wonderfully quiet except for the gentle sounds of breakfast preparation. Sunlight continued spreading across the room while the first signs of energy slowly entered my body. I often encourage my students to pay attention to their surroundings during moments like this because observation naturally generates language. The more details we notice, the more opportunities we have to practice English without forcing ourselves into artificial situations. Fluency grows best when learning feels connected to life itself. A few minutes later, the water reached the perfect temperature, and I began brewing a warm cup of coffee. As the dark liquid slowly filled the mug, I whispered another useful sentence. I am brewing a warm cup of coffee. This expression may appear ordinary, but it introduces practical vocabulary that native speakers use regularly. The verb brew is commonly associated with preparing coffee or tea, and learning vocabulary within realistic contexts makes it easier to remember and apply later. Soon the rich aroma began spreading throughout the entire room. I paused for a moment and appreciated how a simple smell could completely transform the atmosphere of a space. Aroma is a beautiful word because it refers to a pleasant smell, particularly one associated with food or drink. Rather than memorizing the definition from a vocabulary list, I was experiencing the meaning directly through my senses. Experiences create stronger memories than isolated information, which is why contextual learning is so effective. While the coffee continued brewing, I prepared a few slices of bread and arranged them neatly on a plate. Once again, I used English to accompany each action. I am preparing breakfast. I am arranging the bread on a plate. These statements were uncomplicated, yet they helped reinforce useful sentence patterns that appear constantly in everyday conversation. Repetition within meaningful situations gradually transforms passive knowledge into active ability. As breakfast began taking shape, my thoughts naturally shifted toward the day ahead. This transition creates another excellent opportunity for English practice because planning requires us to express goals, responsibilities, and intentions. Looking out the window, I quietly told myself, today I need to finish several important tasks. Then I added another thought. I want to make meaningful progress today. By speaking about genuine goals, I was practicing language that carried personal relevance rather than abstract content. Personal relevance plays an important role in memory and motivation. Students often remember expressions more easily when those expressions connect directly to their own lives. If I describe my actual plans, ambitions, and responsibilities, the language becomes emotionally meaningful. It is no longer just a collection of words. It becomes a tool for organizing my thoughts and shaping my actions. This emotional connection helps transform study into communication. I carried my breakfast to a small table near the window and sat down for a few moments of quiet reflection. Outside, the neighborhood was gradually becoming more active as people began their own morning routines. Some were leaving for work, others were walking children to school, and a few were exercising before starting their day. Watching these scenes reminded me that everyone follows a unique path, yet many of us share similar hopes for growth and improvement. Language learning is often one of those shared aspirations. As I enjoyed my coffee, I reflected on conversations I had experienced with students throughout the years. Many of them believed that fluency would arrive suddenly one day, almost like a magical transformation. In reality, fluency develops gradually through thousands of small interactions with the language. A sentence spoken during breakfast may seem insignificant, but repeated consistently over weeks and months, such moments create remarkable progress. Every practice session contributes to a larger transformation taking place beneath the surface. The psychological benefits of this morning exercise are equally important. When learners practice describing ordinary actions, they reduce the pressure associated with speaking English. Instead of worrying about difficult grammar structures or advanced vocabulary, they focus on communicating simple truths clearly. This approach builds confidence because success becomes achievable from the very beginning. Confidence then encourages further practice, creating a positive cycle that supports long-term development. I took another sip of coffee and allowed myself to appreciate the calm atmosphere surrounding me. There was something deeply satisfying about beginning the day with intention rather than distraction. Many people check messages, scroll through social media, or rush through breakfast without paying attention to their thoughts. By contrast, using English to narrate my morning routine encouraged mindfulness, concentration, and active engagement with the present moment. Language practice became a form of mental training as well as communication training. The more I practiced this method, the more naturally English began flowing through my mind. Instead of translating from another language, I started associating English directly with actions, objects, and experiences. This shift represents one of the most important milestones in language acquisition. When learners stop translating every thought, communication becomes smoother, faster, and more intuitive. The brain begins operating within English rather than constantly moving between two linguistic systems. Eventually, my breakfast was finished, and the last traces of coffee warmth lingered pleasantly in my hands. The kitchen that had served as a peaceful learning environment was now preparing to give way to a much busier world beyond the front door. I gathered my belongings and glanced outside once more. The streets were becoming increasingly active, and the city was clearly awake. A new stage of the day was about to begin. Standing near the door, I felt energized by the simple yet meaningful practice that had taken place throughout the morning. No complicated lessons had been required. No endless grammar explanations had interrupted the experience. Instead, English had woven itself naturally into ordinary life, accompanying every action and observation. This is precisely the kind of relationship with language that leads to lasting fluency. A cool breeze greeted me the moment I stepped outside, carrying the sounds of traffic, distant conversations, and the steady rhythm of a city coming to life. People were already moving purposefully toward schools, offices, shops, and countless other destinations. The peaceful solitude of the kitchen was behind me now, replaced by a world filled with movement, stories, and opportunities for observation. As I joined the flow of people heading into the morning, I knew our next lesson would take us beyond the walls of home and into the vibrant energy of the streets, where English would become a tool for describing the fascinating world unfolding around us. A cool breeze brushed gently against my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk, instantly replacing the quiet stillness of the kitchen with the vibrant energy of the outside world. The city was fully awake now, and every direction seemed alive with movement, purpose, and countless stories unfolding at the same time. Morning sunlight reflected from windows and passing vehicles, creating flashes of brightness that danced across the streets as people hurried toward their destinations. I have always loved this part of the day because it reminds me that every person is living a unique story, carrying dreams, responsibilities, challenges, and ambitions that remain invisible to everyone else. As I joined the steady flow of pedestrians moving through the city, I realized that this ordinary walk could become one of the most powerful English learning exercises imaginable. Many language learners believe they need special study environments to make meaningful progress, yet some of the richest opportunities for learning exist in the everyday world surrounding them. As I walked along the sidewalk, I deliberately shifted my attention toward observation, allowing the environment itself to become my teacher. Instead of thinking about unrelated worries or letting my mind wander aimlessly, I focused on describing everything around me in English. This simple habit trains the brain to think directly in the language rather than constantly translating from another one. Over time, such practice develops fluency in a natural and surprisingly enjoyable way. The air felt refreshingly cool, carrying the scent of freshly brewed coffee from nearby cafes and the faint fragrance of flowers from a small garden beside an apartment building. Immediately, I began forming sentences in English based on what I experienced. I am walking briskly on the sidewalk. The morning air feels fresh and energizing. The city is becoming busier every minute. These thoughts were not complicated, but they were real, and reality always provides the most meaningful context for language acquisition. Every observation became another opportunity to strengthen the connection between English and everyday life. As I continued forward, I noticed people moving around me with different levels of urgency. Some walked quickly while checking messages on their phones, clearly focused on reaching work on time. Others appeared more relaxed, carrying cups of coffee and enjoying the pleasant weather before their daily responsibilities began. Watching them reminded me that language learning is similar to these morning journeys. Everyone moves at a different pace, yet progress still happens as long as movement continues. Comparing ourselves to others often creates unnecessary pressure, while consistent effort creates lasting results. A young woman passed by carrying a backpack and several notebooks, and I guessed she might be heading to a university class. A few steps later, I noticed an older gentleman reading something carefully while waiting at a crosswalk. Nearby, a cyclist moved smoothly through the traffic, navigating the city with remarkable confidence and efficiency. As I observed these people, I practiced another useful sentence. Everyone around me is rushing to be on time for their schedules. This expression is valuable because it describes a situation that occurs in nearly every city around the world. One of the most effective ways to build vocabulary is to connect words directly to visual experiences. When I see a cyclist, I immediately associate the word cyclist with a real image. When I observe a crowded sidewalk, the word crowded becomes connected to an actual environment rather than a dictionary definition. This process helps vocabulary remain in long-term memory because it becomes linked to experience. Human beings naturally remember stories, images, and emotions more effectively than isolated information. Language learning becomes easier when it follows the way the brain already prefers to learn. The streets around me continued growing busier as the morning advanced. Cars glided past steadily, buses stopped to collect passengers, and traffic lights directed the movement of vehicles and pedestrians with quiet efficiency. I found myself describing these scenes internally. Cars are moving smoothly along the road. People are waiting patiently at the intersection. The bus is picking up passengers. Through exercises like these, grammar becomes practical rather than theoretical. Instead of memorizing structures, I was using them to describe reality in real time. As an English teacher, I often encourage students to become active observers rather than passive travelers. Most people walk through familiar environments without truly noticing them. They see buildings, vehicles, and people every day, yet rarely pay close attention to the details. Observation changes everything. Once we begin noticing the world carefully, we discover an endless source of vocabulary and conversation topics. Every street corner, cafe, shop, and public space contains material that can be transformed into English practice. A few minutes later, I passed a small park where several people were exercising before work. Some were jogging along a path lined with trees, while others stretched quietly in preparation for their workouts. The scene immediately inspired more language. Those people are exercising before work. The park looks peaceful and inviting. The weather is absolutely ideal for outdoor activities. By repeatedly forming these descriptions, I was training my brain to generate English automatically rather than relying on translation. Automatic thinking is one of the defining characteristics of fluency. What fascinated me most, however, was not the environment itself, but the people moving through it. Every face seemed to contain a story waiting to be discovered. A woman speaking enthusiastically on the phone appeared excited about something important. A man carrying a briefcase looked focused and determined. Two friends walking together laughed at a joke that only they understood. Looking at them, I quietly repeated a sentence I often recommend to learners. I wonder what fascinating stories lie behind those eyes. Curiosity encourages engagement, and engagement strengthens learning. Psychologically, this kind of observation serves another important purpose. It shifts attention away from self-consciousness and toward the surrounding world. Many learners become trapped by worries about mistakes, pronunciation, or vocabulary gaps. Observation redirects mental energy outward. Instead of thinking, "Am I speaking correctly?" the learner begins thinking, "What can I describe next?" This small shift often reduces anxiety and makes communication feel more natural. Confidence grows more easily when attention is focused on ideas rather than fears. The deeper I immerse myself in these observations, the more naturally English flowed through my thoughts. I was no longer forcing myself to practice. The language simply accompanied my curiosity, helping me interpret and describe everything around me. This is one of the most satisfying stages of language learning, because English begins to feel less like a subject and more like a tool for understanding the world. The experience becomes enjoyable rather than demanding. Soon the buildings around me grew taller, and the atmosphere began changing. The residential areas gradually gave way to office buildings, business centers, and professional workplaces where people prepared to begin their workdays. The sidewalks remained busy, but the mood felt more focused now. Conversations became shorter, walking speeds increased, and many people appeared mentally engaged with the tasks awaiting them. The city was transitioning from a relaxed morning rhythm into a productive working rhythm. As I approached my destination, I reflected on how much valuable practice had emerged from a simple walk. I had described weather, people, vehicles, emotions, activities, and observations without opening a textbook or memorizing a single vocabulary list. Everything came directly from the environment itself. This realization always reminds me that language learning opportunities exist everywhere. The challenge is not finding opportunities but recognizing them when they appear. The entrance of a large office building stood just ahead of me. Employees entered through the glass doors while security staff greeted familiar faces arriving for another day of work. I slowed my pace slightly and observed the scene around me. Some people looked energetic and optimistic, while others still seemed to be waking up mentally. Yet everyone was preparing for a day filled with communication, collaboration, and interaction. These real-life conversations would soon become our next learning environment. I stepped toward the entrance feeling more alert, more confident, and more connected to the language than I had been earlier that morning. The observations made during my walk had transformed ordinary surroundings into meaningful practice opportunities, reinforcing the idea that English can accompany us wherever we go. Beyond those doors waited colleagues, greetings, questions, and professional conversations that would require a different set of communication skills. As I entered the building and headed toward the office, I knew the next stage of our journey was about to begin, a stage where English would move beyond observation and become a bridge between people. The elevator doors opened onto a bright office floor where the quiet energy of a new workday was already beginning to build. Employees moved between desks carrying laptops, notebooks, and cups of coffee while the soft hum of computers blended with the occasional ringing of a phone. I stepped inside and immediately noticed the familiar atmosphere that exists in professional environments everywhere, an atmosphere filled with purpose, concentration, and countless small interactions waiting to happen. Unlike the streets outside, where I had been observing people from a distance, this environment invited direct communication. Here, English would no longer be a tool for describing the world around me. It would become a bridge connecting me to the people sharing the same space. As I walked toward my desk, I took a moment to appreciate how much language surrounds us in professional settings. Conversations drifted through the office from every direction. Some coworkers were discussing deadlines, others were talking about upcoming meetings, and a few were simply exchanging friendly greetings before beginning their tasks. Many English learners spend years focusing on grammar exercises, but rarely practice these ordinary workplace interactions. Yet these conversations often have a greater impact on real-life fluency than many advanced academic topics. Learning how to participate naturally in professional communication is one of the most valuable skills a learner can develop. I placed my bag beside my chair and switched on my computer. Before I could sit down, a colleague approached with a warm smile and greeted me. "Good morning, Linda."
How are you doing today?
He asked in a friendly tone. Questions like this appear simple, but they provide excellent opportunities to practice natural responses. Instead of answering with a short phrase such as fine or good, I prefer to expand my answer slightly. This creates a more engaging conversation while allowing me to demonstrate greater confidence and fluency. I smiled and replied, "Good morning. I'm doing very well. Thank you. It's shaping up to be a productive day already." The phrase shaping up is particularly useful because native speakers frequently use it to describe a situation that is developing in a positive way. Rather than saying something is good, expressions like this add personality and sophistication to speech. Small adjustments in vocabulary often make a noticeable difference in how confident and natural a speaker sounds. Advanced communication is not always about using difficult words. Sometimes it is about choosing more precise and expressive ones. My colleague nodded and seemed genuinely interested in continuing the conversation. After exchanging a few comments about work, he asked a question that immediately captured my attention. "So, how has your English practice been going lately?"
He said.
This is exactly the kind of situation many learners dream about because it creates a natural opportunity to talk about personal growth and language development. It is also the perfect moment to move beyond basic answers and introduce vocabulary that reflects maturity, discipline, and commitment. I paused for a moment, not because I lacked words, but because I wanted to choose them carefully. Then I replied, "My practice has been very consistent and highly disciplined lately. I've been focusing on refining my communication skills and expanding my professional vocabulary. I feel like I'm controlling the language much better than before." As I spoke, I noticed how different this response sounded compared to the shorter answers many learners often give. Instead of simply saying, "My English is improving," I was providing detail, confidence, and evidence of progress. The word disciplined is particularly powerful because it communicates dedication and self-control. When someone describes themselves as disciplined, listeners often imagine a person who follows routines, stays committed to goals, and continues working even when motivation fluctuates. In professional environments, this word carries very positive associations because employers and colleagues tend to respect consistency and reliability. Learning vocabulary is not only about understanding definitions, it is also about understanding the impressions those words create in the minds of others. Another word worth paying attention to is refining. I have always loved this word because it suggests continuous improvement rather than dramatic transformation. When we refine a skill, we polish it carefully over time. The image is similar to an artist gradually improving a painting or a craftsman perfecting a piece of work through patience and attention to detail. Language learning is often a process of refinement. We do not wake up one morning suddenly fluent. Instead, we improve little by little through repeated exposure, practice, and reflection. My colleague seemed impressed by the response and smiled approvingly. "That sounds like a great approach," he said. "A lot of people start learning enthusiastically, but struggle to stay consistent." His observation reminded me of a challenge that nearly every learner faces at some point. Motivation is powerful, but motivation alone rarely produces long-term success. Successful learners usually develop systems, habits, and routines that continue supporting progress even during periods when enthusiasm naturally rises and falls. Consistency often matters more than intensity. The conversation continued for several minutes, and I found myself enjoying the opportunity to discuss learning from a professional perspective. Workplace conversations frequently provide excellent practice because they combine friendliness with meaningful topics. Unlike classroom exercises, these exchanges feel authentic because they emerge naturally from daily life. Authentic communication encourages spontaneous thinking, which is one of the most important skills in language development. The more often learners engage in real conversations, the more comfortable they become responding without overthinking every sentence. As the morning progressed, the office became increasingly busy. Employees joined meetings, answered emails, and collaborated on projects while maintaining a steady rhythm of communication throughout the day. Observing this environment reminded me that professional English is often less about complicated grammar and more about clarity. People value communication that is concise, respectful, and easy to understand. A speaker who communicates clearly will usually make a stronger impression than someone who uses advanced vocabulary incorrectly. Several hours passed quickly as I focused on my work. Occasionally, I exchanged brief comments with colleagues about projects, schedules, and upcoming responsibilities. These small interactions reinforced an important lesson. Fluency is not built through a single conversation. It develops through hundreds of small exchanges repeated over time. Every greeting, every question, and every response contributes to greater confidence and familiarity with the language. Progress accumulates gradually, often in ways we do not immediately notice. At one point during the morning, I reflected on how differently I viewed communication compared to when I first began teaching. Early in my career, I assumed learners primarily needed more vocabulary and grammar knowledge. While those elements remain important, experience taught me that confidence plays an equally significant role. Many learners already know far more English than they realize. Their challenge is not always knowledge but hesitation. Learning to trust existing abilities often unlocks progress that was already waiting beneath the surface. The office atmosphere remained focused yet comfortable. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating desks covered with notebooks, monitors, and coffee cups. Conversations rose and fell naturally throughout the room as people collaborated on shared goals. I appreciated the sense of community that workplaces often create. Although everyone had different responsibilities, they were united by a common purpose. Language serves a similar function by bringing people together and allowing them to cooperate more effectively. Eventually, I glanced at the clock and realized that the morning had passed faster than expected. The concentrated energy that filled the office earlier was beginning to soften as lunchtime approached. People started discussing where they might eat, stretching after hours of work, and stepping away from their desks for short breaks. The shift in atmosphere was subtle but noticeable. Even the most productive minds require moments of rest and recovery in order to perform at their best. I saved my work, stood up from my chair, and looked around the office one more time. The conversations I had experienced throughout the morning reminded me that language learning reaches its highest value when it helps us connect with others. Vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation all matter, but their ultimate purpose is communication. Every interaction had provided another opportunity to practice clarity, confidence, and authenticity. These qualities form the foundation of successful communication in any language. As I left my desk and headed toward the elevator, I felt satisfied with the progress the morning had brought. Outside the office windows, the city continued moving at its usual pace, but for the next hour, I wanted something quieter. The constant flow of tasks, conversations, and responsibilities had been rewarding, yet I could feel my mind asking for a brief moment of peace. Somewhere beyond the busy streets and crowded buildings, a quiet corner and a warm drink were waiting, and I knew that the next stage of the day would offer a different kind of lesson, one focused not on productivity but on reflection, relaxation, and allowing English to flow naturally through a calmer state of mind. The office elevator carried me quietly down to the ground floor, while the steady rhythm of the morning slowly faded from my thoughts. For several hours, my attention had been focused on meetings, conversations, projects, and professional responsibilities, and although the work had been productive, I could feel my mind asking for a brief moment of stillness. Through the glass doors of the building, I could see the city continuing its daily routine, people moving between restaurants, cafes, and office towers as lunchtime finally arrived. The atmosphere felt noticeably different from the busy energy of the morning. There was less urgency in people's movements now, as though everyone had been given temporary permission to slow down and breathe. A short walk brought me to a small cafe tucked between two larger buildings. It was not particularly famous or fashionable, which was exactly why I liked it. The place had a quiet charm that made it feel separate from the noise of the city. Soft music played in the background, and the warm scent of coffee drifted through the air as customers sat at small tables enjoying their lunch breaks. I ordered a drink, thanked the barista, and found a seat near a large window where sunlight illuminated the wooden table in front of me. For a moment, I simply sat there and appreciated the calmness of the environment. One of the greatest mistakes language learners make is believing that practice can only happen during active conversations. While speaking with other people is important, some of the most valuable progress occurs during quiet moments of reflection. Sitting alone in the cafe, I began observing my surroundings and describing them in English inside my mind. The cafe feels peaceful and relaxing. The music is soft and comforting. People are enjoying their lunch break. These simple observations allowed English to remain active without requiring any effort or pressure. The language became a natural companion rather than a task that needed to be completed. As I looked around the room, I noticed several people immersed in their own worlds. One man was reading a book while slowly sipping coffee. A woman near the window was working on her laptop, occasionally pausing to stare thoughtfully into the distance. Two friends sat nearby, engaged in a lively conversation filled with laughter and animated gestures. Observing these scenes reminded me that every person carries invisible thoughts, concerns, hopes, and dreams. Language gives us the ability to express those inner worlds, which is why learning to communicate effectively can be such a life-changing experience. The cafe provided the perfect environment for another type of English practice, one that many learners overlook completely. Instead of describing physical actions, I began describing thoughts and emotions. I feel relaxed after a productive morning. I am grateful for this quiet moment. I am looking forward to the rest of the day. Sentences like these may seem ordinary, yet they teach an incredibly important skill. Fluency is not only about describing what we see. It is also about expressing what we think and feel. Emotional vocabulary allows communication to become deeper, richer, and more authentic. As I took a sip of my drink, I reflected on how different language learning feels when pressure is removed. Many students become so focused on making rapid progress that they forget to enjoy the process itself. They constantly measure themselves against unrealistic expectations and become discouraged whenever mistakes appear. Yet mistakes are not evidence of failure. They are evidence of participation. Every person who becomes fluent has traveled through countless moments of uncertainty, confusion, and correction. Progress belongs to those who continue moving forward despite imperfection. The word unwind came to mind as I sat comfortably in my chair. It is a useful word that describes the process of relaxing after stress or work. In American English, people often say they need time to unwind after a busy day. The expression carries the image of tension slowly releasing from the mind and body. Understanding vocabulary through personal experience makes it easier to remember because the meaning becomes connected to genuine feelings rather than abstract definitions. At that moment, I was not merely learning the word unwind. I was living it. Outside the window, people continued moving through the city, but from my seat inside the cafe, everything appeared calmer and slower. This contrast created an opportunity for more descriptive language. The streets outside are busy, but the cafe feels peaceful. The city is moving quickly, while I am taking a moment to slow down. Practicing comparisons like these helps learners develop flexibility in communication. Instead of producing isolated sentences, they begin connecting ideas and creating more sophisticated thoughts. Communication becomes more natural when relationships between ideas are clearly expressed. One reason I enjoy these quiet lunchtime moments is that they create space for self-reflection. Reflection is a valuable habit not only for language learning, but for personal growth in general. When we pause to examine our experiences, we often notice progress that would otherwise remain invisible. Looking back on the morning, I realized how many opportunities for English practice had already appeared throughout the day. The kitchen, the sidewalk, the office, and now the cafe had each become a learning environment. None of these places had been designed for language education, yet all of them had contributed to fluency. A learner who develops the habit of noticing such opportunities gains a tremendous advantage. Instead of waiting for study time to begin, they transform ordinary life into continuous practice. They describe their surroundings, express their opinions, observe other people, and narrate daily experiences in English. This approach creates far more exposure than traditional study methods alone. The language becomes integrated into life rather than separated from it. Over time, English starts feeling less like a foreign language and more like a familiar tool for thinking. The psychological effects of this approach are equally important. When English becomes part of daily life, anxiety often decreases. The learner stops viewing every interaction as a performance and begins treating communication as something normal. Confidence develops gradually because the language appears repeatedly in low-pressure situations. By the time a challenging conversation occurs, the brain has already spent countless hours operating comfortably in English. Familiarity reduces fear, and reduced fear encourages better communication. As lunchtime continued, I listened to fragments of conversation drifting through the cafe. People discussed weekend plans, work projects, travel experiences, and family events. Their topics were not extraordinary, yet they demonstrated an important truth about language. Most real-world communication revolves around everyday experiences. Learners sometimes become obsessed with rare vocabulary while neglecting the common expressions used in ordinary conversations. True fluency depends far more on mastering everyday language than memorizing unusual words. The sunlight shifted slightly across the floor, reminding me that the lunch break would not last forever. Soon it would be time to return to the office and continue the day's responsibilities. Yet I did not feel disappointed. The quiet reflection of the past hour had refreshed my energy and sharpened my focus. Sometimes productivity requires effort, while other times it requires rest. Understanding this balance is important for both professional success and language development. A tired mind struggles to learn effectively, while a refreshed mind absorbs information more naturally. Before leaving, I spent a final moment practicing gratitude in English. I am grateful for this peaceful afternoon. I am grateful for the opportunity to learn every day. I am grateful for the progress I am making. These statements may seem simple, but they carry emotional weight. Gratitude encourages positive thinking, and positive emotions often improve motivation. Language learning becomes easier when associated with curiosity, appreciation, and enjoyment rather than frustration or self-criticism. Eventually, I stood up, gathered my belongings, and glanced around the cafe one last time. The calm atmosphere that had welcomed me earlier remained unchanged, yet I felt slightly different now. My mind was clearer, my energy had returned, and my thoughts flowed more naturally in English. The brief escape from the office had provided exactly what I needed. Sometimes growth occurs through focused effort, and sometimes it emerges through quiet reflection. Both are essential parts of the journey. Stepping back onto the sidewalk, I felt the afternoon air against my face as the city continued its endless movement around me. The second half of the workday was waiting just ahead, bringing new conversations, new challenges, and new opportunities to practice English in meaningful ways. Yet somewhere beneath those professional responsibilities, another lesson was beginning to take shape, one that would focus not on observation or relaxation, but on the mindset required to keep improving even when progress feels slow. As I started walking back toward the office, I found myself thinking about motivation, discipline, and the invisible habits that separate temporary enthusiasm from lasting success. The walk back to the office felt different from the walk that had brought me to the cafe earlier. The streets were still busy, the buildings remained unchanged, and the city continued moving with the same steady rhythm, yet my mind had become noticeably calmer. The quiet lunch break had given me an opportunity to step away from responsibilities and reconnect with my thoughts. As I crossed the street and joined the flow of pedestrians heading back to work, one question began occupying my attention. What truly separates people who eventually become fluent from those who abandon their learning journey halfway through? Over the years, both as a teacher and as a language learner myself, I've spent countless hours reflecting on that question. Many people assume that successful learners possess extraordinary talent. They imagine that fluent speakers have exceptional memories, unusual intelligence, or some natural gift that makes learning easier. While talent can certainly help, experience has taught me that talent is rarely the deciding factor. I have met highly intelligent individuals who gave up after a few months because they lost motivation. At the same time, I have seen ordinary learners achieve remarkable fluency simply because they continued showing up every day. Consistency often accomplishes what talent alone cannot. As I entered the building and waited for the elevator, I found myself thinking about a word that had appeared earlier in the day during my conversation with a colleague. That word was disciplined. It is a word that many learners admire, yet relatively few truly understand. Discipline is not about forcing yourself to work endlessly without rest. It is not about studying for 10 hours every day or sacrificing every moment of free time. True discipline is much quieter than that. It is the ability to continue taking small actions even when excitement temporarily disappears. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped inside along with several coworkers returning from lunch. While the elevator slowly carried us upward, I reflected on how motivation and discipline often get confused. Motivation feels wonderful because it fills us with energy and enthusiasm. It inspires us to start new projects, buy new books, and create ambitious goals. Yet motivation behaves like the weather. Some days it appears naturally, and other days it seems completely absent. If progress depends entirely on motivation, learning becomes unpredictable. Discipline provides stability when motivation fluctuates. One of the most important lessons I ever learned was that fluency is not built during extraordinary days. It is built during ordinary ones. Anyone can practice enthusiastically when they feel inspired. The real challenge appears on days when energy is low, schedules are crowded, and progress feels invisible. Those are the moments that shape long-term success. A learner who studies for 20 minutes consistently often achieves more than someone who studies intensely for a week and then disappears for a month. Small actions repeated regularly create extraordinary results over time. Back at my desk, I opened my laptop and prepared for the afternoon's work. Around me, coworkers gradually returned to their tasks, and the office settled once again into a productive rhythm. The atmosphere reminded me of another useful word that advanced English learners should understand. That word is momentum. Momentum refers to the force that keeps something moving forward. In language learning, momentum develops when consistent practice becomes a habit. Once momentum exists, continuing feels easier because progress is already in motion. I often compare language learning to pushing a heavy bicycle uphill. At the beginning, every movement requires effort. The bicycle feels difficult to control, and progress seems frustratingly slow. Many learners quit during this stage because they expect immediate results. However, once the bicycle reaches the top and begins moving downhill, the experience changes dramatically. Momentum takes over, and maintaining movement becomes much easier. Language learning follows a similar pattern. The early stages require patience, but persistence eventually creates acceleration. As the afternoon continued, I found myself reviewing notes from previous lessons and conversations. Looking back on earlier stages of my own journey always reminds me how gradual improvement truly is. When people become fluent, they often forget how difficult simple conversations once felt. They forget the uncertainty, the hesitation, and the mistakes that accompanied their first attempts. Yet every fluent speaker has experienced those struggles. Progress becomes visible only when we compare ourselves to our past selves rather than constantly comparing ourselves to others. Comparison is one of the greatest enemies of motivation. Modern technology makes it easy to observe highly successful learners and assume that everyone else is progressing faster than we are. Social media often presents polished results while hiding the years of effort that produce them. When learners focus excessively on other people's achievements, they sometimes overlook their own growth. A healthier approach is to ask a simple question. Am I slightly better today than I was a month ago? If the answer is yes, meaningful progress is already occurring. A notification appeared on my computer screen, reminding me about an upcoming meeting. As I prepared for it, I thought about another important concept. Confidence is often misunderstood. Many people believe confidence arrives after mastery. In reality, confidence often develops alongside improvement rather than after it. Every time a learner successfully communicates despite uncertainty, confidence grows a little stronger. Waiting until everything feels perfect before speaking usually delays progress unnecessarily. The meeting itself provided another opportunity to observe communication in action. Colleagues exchanged ideas, solved problems, and discussed plans for future projects. What struck me once again was how little perfect language mattered compared to clear communication. People focused primarily on understanding one another. They listened, responded, clarified misunderstandings, and worked together towards shared goals. Effective communication is not about perfection. It is about connection. After the meeting ended, I returned to my desk with renewed appreciation for the practical purpose of language. Vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation, and listening skills are all important, but they serve a larger objective. Their purpose is to help us share ideas, build relationships, solve problems, and participate more fully in the world around us. When learners lose sight of that purpose, studying can begin to feel mechanical. Remembering the human side of communication restores meaning to the process. Outside the office windows, the afternoon's sunlight gradually began changing. The bright intensity of midday softened into warmer tones, casting long shadows across nearby buildings. The changing light reminded me that progress often resembles the movement of the sun. We rarely notice it moment by moment, yet significant change becomes obvious when enough time has passed. Language development works the same way. Daily improvements may seem small, but months of consistent effort eventually produce transformations that feel remarkable. Another valuable word came to mind as I watched the sunlight shift. The word is perseverance. Perseverance refers to the ability to continue despite challenges, setbacks, or slow progress. Unlike motivation, perseverance does not depend on emotion. It depends on commitment. A learner who possesses perseverance understands that difficult periods are temporary. They continue practicing even when improvement feels invisible because they trust the process itself. This mindset becomes especially important during intermediate stages of learning. Beginners often experience rapid progress because every new word feels exciting. Advanced learners can enjoy the satisfaction of expressing complex ideas. Intermediate learners, however, sometimes enter a period where improvement feels slower. During this stage, perseverance becomes invaluable. The learners who continue moving forward eventually break through barriers that once seemed impossible. Patience transforms temporary plateaus into future growth. As the workday moved closer to its end, I realized that the lessons of the afternoon extended far beyond English. Discipline, momentum, confidence, perseverance, and consistency are not merely language learning concepts. They're life skills. The same principles that help someone become fluent can also help them develop professionally, improve relationships, and pursue personal goals. Learning a language often teaches us far more than vocabulary. It teaches us how growth itself works. The office gradually became quieter as people completed their final tasks and prepared to leave. Some gathered their belongings, others finished emails, and a few exchanged brief conversations before heading home. I saved my work and leaned back in my chair for a moment, reflecting on everything the day had already provided. From the peaceful kitchen in the morning to the busy streets, the professional conversations, the quiet cafe, and the reflections of the afternoon, every environment had offered a different lesson. Standing up from my desk, I felt a sense of appreciation for the journey. Fluency no longer seemed like a distant destination. Instead, it felt like something being built gradually through ordinary experiences. Every observation, every conversation, and every moment of reflection contributed another small piece to the foundation. Learning was not happening somewhere in the future. It was happening now, one day at a time. As I walked toward the elevator and prepared to leave the office, the evening light streamed through the windows and painted the city in shades of gold and amber. The workday was ending, but another chapter of the journey was about to begin. Outside, the world was transitioning into evening, and with that transition would come a new opportunity to practice English in a different way. The conversations of the workplace were behind me now, yet the thoughts they inspired continued moving through my mind. Somewhere beyond the office walls, a meaningful discussion was waiting to unfold, one that would reveal practical strategies for learning more effectively and turning daily practice into lasting success. The evening air felt noticeably different from the atmosphere inside the office. As I stepped out of the building, the intensity of the workday seemed to dissolve behind me, replaced by a calmer rhythm that settled over the city as daylight slowly began to fade. People streamed out of nearby office towers carrying bags, laptops, and unfinished thoughts from the day. Some headed directly home, while others gathered with friends or colleagues to enjoy a brief moment of relaxation before the evening continued. I had only taken a few steps down the sidewalk when I heard someone call my name. Turning around, I saw an old friend approaching with a smile, and within moments we found ourselves walking together through the golden light of late afternoon. My friend had always been curious about language learning. Every time we met, our conversations eventually drifted toward English, communication, and personal development. After exchanging a few comments about work and daily life, she asked the question I had heard countless times over the years. If you could give only one piece of advice to someone learning English, what would it be? The question made me smile because it sounded simple, yet the answer was surprisingly difficult. Language learning is influenced by so many factors that reducing everything to a single idea feels almost impossible. Still, after a moment of thought, I replied with the principle that had transformed my own learning journey more than any other. I would stop trying to study English, I said. My friend immediately looked confused. What do you mean? She asked. The reaction was exactly what I expected because the statement sounds contradictory at first. I laughed softly and explained. I don't mean stop learning. I mean stop treating English as something that only exists during study sessions. The moment you begin living with the language instead of merely studying it, everything changes. As we continued walking, I noticed her expression shift from confusion to curiosity. I explained that many learners place English inside a small box. They open that box during a lesson, a course, or a practice session, and then close it again when the activity ends. As a result, English becomes something separate from real life. Yet fluent speakers do not experience language that way. Language accompanies them throughout the day. It appears while they think, observe, plan, reflect, and interact with the world around them. The goal is not to increase the number of study hours endlessly. The goal is to increase the number of moments during which English naturally participates in daily life. My friend listened carefully as we crossed a busy intersection and continued toward a quieter street lined with trees. So, how do you actually do that? She asked. This question brought me back to the experiences I had already lived through earlier that day. I described how I had narrated my actions while preparing breakfast, observed the city during my morning walk, practiced workplace conversations, and reflected in English during lunch. None of these moments had required a classroom. None had required a textbook. Yet together they created hours of meaningful language exposure woven naturally into everyday experiences. She nodded thoughtfully and admitted that she often waited for perfect study conditions before practicing. If she felt tired, busy, or distracted, she postponed learning until a more convenient time. I understood exactly what she meant because many learners fall into the same pattern. They imagine that progress requires long periods of uninterrupted concentration. While focused study certainly has value, waiting for ideal conditions often leads to inconsistency. The most successful learners usually find ways to practice even when circumstances are less than perfect. As we continued walking, I introduced another important concept. The secret isn't intensity, I explained. The secret is sustainability. Sustainability is a powerful word because it refers to something that can continue over a long period of time without becoming exhausting or impossible to maintain. A learner who studies intensely for 1 week and then quits gains far less than someone who practices consistently for months. Sustainable habits create lasting results because they fit naturally into everyday life. They become routines rather than temporary bursts of motivation. The conversation soon shifted towards speaking confidence, a topic that concerns nearly every learner. My friend admitted that she often understood more English than she was willing to speak. Whenever opportunities for conversation appeared, she worried about making mistakes or sounding unnatural. I smiled because her experience was incredibly common. Many learners believe confidence arrives before speaking. In reality, confidence often develops because of speaking. The act of communicating despite uncertainty gradually teaches the brain that mistakes are survivable and learning can continue. There was a period when I constantly analyzed every sentence before speaking. I wanted everything to be correct, polished, and impressive. Unfortunately, that desire for perfection often slowed communication and created unnecessary stress. Eventually, I realized that real conversations move too quickly for endless analysis. Native speakers focus primarily on connection, understanding, and the exchange of ideas. Once I accepted that communication mattered more than perfection, speaking became significantly easier. The sky above us had begun changing colors now, shifting gradually from bright blue to softer shades of orange and gold. The beauty of the evening created another opportunity to demonstrate how English can emerge naturally from observation. I pointed toward the horizon and said, "The sunset looks absolutely stunning tonight." My friend immediately repeated the sentence. Then she added her own observation. "The clouds are reflecting the sunlight beautifully." Without realizing it, she had just participated in exactly the kind of spontaneous language practice we had been discussing. This led us into a conversation about vocabulary growth. Many learners search constantly for advanced words, believing that sophisticated vocabulary automatically creates fluency. While vocabulary certainly matters, I explained that true mastery comes from using words repeatedly in meaningful contexts. Seeing a word once in a list rarely creates lasting knowledge. Encountering that same word in conversations, observations, books, and personal experiences gradually transforms recognition into ownership. The most useful vocabulary is often the vocabulary we actually use. We eventually stopped near a small public square where people sat on benches enjoying the pleasant evening weather. Children played nearby while couples walked slowly through the open space. The relaxed atmosphere encouraged deeper reflection. My friend asked how learners should respond when progress feels slow. It was an important question because nearly everyone experiences periods where improvement becomes difficult to notice. Those periods often determine whether someone continues learning or gives up entirely. I told her that progress rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. Most growth occurs quietly beneath the surface. Day by day, small improvements seem insignificant. Yet when enough time passes, the accumulated effect becomes impossible to ignore. Language learning resembles planting a tree. For weeks, visible change may appear minimal. Then gradually the roots strengthen, the trunk grows taller, and the transformation becomes obvious. Patience allows invisible progress to become visible achievement. The discussion continued as the city lights slowly began appearing around us. Street lamps illuminated sidewalks, shop windows glowed warmly, and the evening atmosphere became increasingly peaceful. I realized that our conversation itself represented one of the most effective learning experiences possible. We were not discussing grammar rules or memorizing vocabulary lists. We were exchanging ideas, sharing perspectives, and using language for its true purpose. Communication becomes meaningful when it connects people rather than merely demonstrating knowledge. Before saying goodbye, my friend thanked me for the conversation. "You always make language learning sound less complicated," she said. Her comment stayed with me because complexity often discourages learners unnecessarily. Fluency is not built through secrets, shortcuts, or magical techniques. It grows through curiosity, consistency, observation, reflection, and communication. The process may require time, but it does not need to feel overwhelming. Small actions repeated faithfully create remarkable outcomes. We parted ways as darkness gradually settled over the city. I continued walking alone, reflecting on everything we had discussed. The conversation had reinforced many of the lessons that had appeared throughout the day. English was not confined to classrooms, courses, or study schedules. It could accompany a person through breakfast, city streets, workplaces, cafes, and evening walks. The language became stronger each time it was connected to real experiences and genuine thoughts. As I made my way home beneath the glow of streetlights, another realization began forming in my mind. Many learners understand effective strategies intellectually, yet still struggle with moments of doubt. Even after building good habits, questions sometimes appear. Am I improving quickly enough? Will I ever become truly fluent? These doubts are natural, but they can become obstacles if left unchallenged. The evening was growing quieter now, and I sensed that the next stage of our journey would move inward, toward a deeper conversation about self-belief, resilience, and the mental barriers that often stand between learners and the progress they seek. The city had become noticeably quieter by the time I turned onto the street leading home. The rush of the workday was gone. The afternoon conversations had faded into memory, and the bright colors of sunset had given way to the softer glow of evening lights. Storefronts illuminated the sidewalks with warm reflections, and the steady movement of traffic created a gentle background soundtrack that somehow felt calming rather than distracting. Walking alone through the evening air, I found myself thinking about something that almost every language learner experiences sooner or later. No matter how motivated, disciplined, or committed a person may be, there are moments when doubt quietly appears and begins asking uncomfortable questions. Earlier in the day, my conversation with my friend had focused on strategies, habits, and consistency. Those topics are important because they provide a practical roadmap for progress. Yet, even the best strategies cannot completely eliminate moments of uncertainty. Many learners eventually reach a point where they wonder whether their efforts are truly working. They study regularly, practice speaking, learn new vocabulary, and expose themselves to English every day, yet the improvement they hope to see feels frustratingly slow. During those moments, the challenge is no longer linguistic. It becomes psychological. As I continued walking, I remembered a period in my own learning journey when self-doubt seemed to follow me everywhere. Every mistake felt larger than it actually was. Every forgotten word seemed like evidence that I was not progressing fast enough. Whenever I listened to highly fluent speakers, I focused almost exclusively on the enormous gap between their abilities and my own. Instead of appreciating what I had already accomplished, I became obsessed with everything I had not yet mastered. Looking back now, I realized that this mindset created far more obstacles than any grammar rule or vocabulary challenge ever could. The human mind has a curious tendency to underestimate gradual improvement. We notice dramatic changes immediately, but we often overlook the small transformations occurring day by day. Language learning rarely provides dramatic breakthroughs on demand. More often, it resembles the slow accumulation of tiny victories. One day you understand a sentence that would have confused you a month earlier. Another day you respond naturally in a conversation without translating in your head. Later, you realize that an English podcast feels easier to follow than it once did. Each improvement seems small in isolation, yet together they create remarkable progress. A group of friends passed by laughing as they walked toward a nearby restaurant. Their conversation reminded me of an important truth. Most people are far less focused on our mistakes than we imagine. Learners often assume that every grammatical error or pronunciation slip will attract attention and judgment. In reality, most listeners are primarily interested in understanding the message being communicated. Communication is not an examination. It is a shared effort between people attempting to exchange ideas. Once I truly understood this principle, speaking became significantly less intimidating. One phrase that helped me during difficult periods was surprisingly simple. Progress is not always visible. Whenever frustration appeared, I repeated that sentence to myself. The statement reminded me that growth often occurs beneath the surface long before obvious results emerge. A seed buried in the ground may appear inactive for weeks, yet important development is taking place where nobody can see it. Language learning works in much the same way. Listening practice strengthens comprehension. Reading expands vocabulary. Conversations improve fluency. Even when progress feels invisible, the brain continues adapting and improving. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk as I approached a small park. A few people remained there despite the late hour, enjoying the cool evening weather before returning home. Watching them, I thought about another challenge that frequently affects learners. Many people create unrealistic expectations regarding how quickly fluency should develop. Modern culture celebrates instant results, rapid transformations, and overnight success stories. Language acquisition follows a very different timeline. It rewards patience rather than urgency. The learners who succeed are often those who learn to appreciate steady progress instead of demanding immediate perfection. I found an empty bench and sat down for a few moments, allowing the peaceful atmosphere to settle around me. The quiet environment seemed perfect for reflection. Looking back on everything that had happened throughout the day, I noticed how many opportunities for English practice had naturally appeared. There had been the breakfast routine, the observations during my morning walk, the conversations at work, the reflections in the cafe, and the discussion with my friend after the office. None of these moments had felt like traditional study sessions. Yet, together they represented hours of meaningful engagement with the language. This realization led me to another important insight. Learners often underestimate the value of accumulated exposure. A single conversation may not transform fluency. One vocabulary word may not seem significant. A short podcast episode may feel insignificant compared to larger goals. Yet language development is built through accumulation. Every sentence heard, every phrase spoken, and every idea expressed contributes to a larger process unfolding over time. Progress rarely depends on one extraordinary effort. More often, it emerges from hundreds of ordinary ones. The evening breeze moved gently through the trees, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass and distant food vendors preparing meals for late customers. I smiled as another memory surfaced. Years ago, I believed that fluent speakers rarely experienced uncertainty. I imagined they moved effortlessly through conversations without hesitation or self-correction. Experience eventually taught me otherwise. Even highly proficient speakers occasionally search for words, reformulate ideas, or make mistakes. The difference is not the absence of imperfection. The difference is that they continue communicating despite it. That distinction changed my perspective completely. Instead of viewing mistakes as evidence of weakness, I began seeing them as evidence of participation. Every mistake meant I was actively using the language. Every correction represented an opportunity to improve. Avoiding mistakes entirely would have required avoiding communication altogether, and that would have guaranteed stagnation. Growth belongs to those who are willing to be imperfect in public while continuing to learn in private. The park had grown even quieter now. Most people had already left, and the city seemed to be settling into the slower rhythm of night. I stood up from the bench and resumed walking home. As I did, I reflected on how important self-compassion is during the learning process. Many learners speak to themselves in ways they would never speak to a friend. They criticize every error, dismiss every achievement, and constantly focus on perceived shortcomings. Yet encouragement often produces better results than criticism. Progress becomes easier when we acknowledge improvement instead of constantly demanding more. One useful habit I recommend is celebrating small victories. A successful conversation, a new expression learned naturally, or a moment of understanding without translation all deserve recognition. These moments may appear minor, but they represent genuine growth. Recognizing them helps maintain motivation during periods when larger goals still seem distant. Confidence develops through accumulated evidence, and every small success contributes another piece of that evidence. By the time I reached my neighborhood, the sky had turned completely dark. Lights glowed warmly from the windows of nearby homes, creating a sense of comfort and familiarity. The journey through the day had revealed many different aspects of language learning, from observation and communication to discipline and perseverance. Yet perhaps the most important lesson of all involved trust. Trusting the process. Trusting consistent effort. Trusting that progress is occurring even when results are not immediately visible. I unlocked my front door and stepped inside, grateful for the quiet atmosphere waiting for me. The events of the day continued moving through my thoughts as I set down my belongings and prepared to relax for the evening. Although the world outside was gradually becoming silent, my mind remained active with ideas about growth, learning, and personal development. The doubts that once seemed so powerful now appeared much smaller when viewed through the lens of patience and perspective. As I settled into the calmness of home, I sensed that another lesson was waiting just ahead. The conversations, observations, and reflections of the day had all contributed to a deeper understanding of how language develops. Yet there was still one final challenge many learners face after overcoming doubt. It is the challenge of transforming English from something practiced occasionally into something that becomes part of daily identity. Sitting quietly in the warm glow of the evening, I began thinking about habits, routines, and the subtle ways people reshape their lives when a new language truly becomes part of who they are. The house was wonderfully quiet when I finally settled into my favorite chair near the window. Outside, the city continued moving through the night, but the sounds had softened into a distant hum that barely reached the room. A small lamp cast a warm glow across my desk, creating an atmosphere that felt calm, reflective, and deeply comfortable. After a day filled with observations, conversations, work responsibilities, and personal reflection, I found myself appreciating this final period of stillness. There is something special about the evening because it invites us to look back on the day and discover lessons that were not immediately obvious while events were unfolding. I set a cup of tea beside me and glanced toward the notebook resting on the desk. For years, I had developed the habit of spending a few minutes each evening reviewing my thoughts, not as a strict academic exercise, but as a way of understanding my own progress more clearly. Reflection has always been one of the most powerful learning tools available to us. When we pause and examine our experiences, patterns begin to emerge. Successes become easier to recognize, challenges become easier to understand, and the path forward becomes easier to see. As I thought about the day, one realization stood out above all others. English had appeared in nearly every part of my routine. It had accompanied me while preparing breakfast, while walking through the city, while communicating with colleagues, while relaxing in a cafe, while sharing ideas with a friend, and while reflecting on personal growth. None of these moments felt forced. None required extraordinary effort. The language simply flowed through ordinary experiences, quietly integrating itself into daily life. That integration is what many learners dream about, even if they do not always realize it. When people first begin learning English, they often view it as something external. It feels like a subject, a course, or a skill that exists outside their identity. They study it during specific hours and then return to their normal lives afterward. Yet something remarkable happens as proficiency develops. Gradually, English stops feeling separate. Instead of being a task, it becomes a tool. Instead of being an obligation, it becomes a companion. The language begins participating naturally in thoughts, observations, and experiences. I remember the first time I noticed this transformation in my own life. It happened during an ordinary afternoon many years ago. I was walking through a grocery store when I suddenly realized I had been thinking in English without making a conscious effort. The experience lasted only a few moments, but it felt significant. It was as though a door had quietly opened inside my mind. For the first time, English was not something I was actively trying to produce. It was simply there, functioning naturally as part of my thinking process. That memory returned to me now as I sat comfortably in the evening silence. Many learners assume that thinking in English requires some special technique or advanced level of mastery. In reality, it usually develops through repeated exposure and consistent use. Every time we describe our surroundings, express our opinions, or narrate our actions in English, we strengthen the brain's ability to operate directly within the language. Eventually, these small moments accumulate until English begins appearing spontaneously in our thoughts. The process is surprisingly similar to building a friendship. At first, interactions feel unfamiliar because the relationship is still developing. Communication may require effort, and there may be periods of uncertainty. Over time, however, familiarity grows. The connection becomes more natural, more comfortable, and more automatic. Language develops in much the same way. The more time we spend with English, the more familiar it becomes. Eventually, interacting with the language feels less like work and more like spending time with an old friend. As the evening continued, I found myself reflecting on another important concept. Identity plays a significant role in long-term success. Many learners focus entirely on actions. They ask how many hours they should study, how many words they should memorize, or how many exercises they should complete. Those questions certainly matter, but there is another question that often proves even more powerful. What kind of person am I becoming? The answer influences behavior in profound ways. A person who sees themselves as someone learning English may practice occasionally when motivation appears. A person who sees themselves as an English user approaches life differently. They actively seek opportunities to engage with the language because doing so aligns with their identity. Their actions become expressions of who they believe they are. This subtle shift can transform learning from a temporary project into a lasting lifestyle. Identity often shapes habits more effectively than willpower alone. I thought about the phrase that had begun our journey earlier in the day. I am making progress every single day. At first glance, the sentence seems simple. Yet, after everything I had experienced throughout the day, it felt much more meaningful. Progress is not always dramatic. It does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes progress appears in the form of a new word remembered naturally. Sometimes it appears as increased confidence during a conversation. Sometimes it appears as the ability to think directly in English for a few moments longer than before. These small improvements often go unnoticed because learners become focused on distant goals. They imagine fluency as a destination waiting somewhere far ahead and overlook the growth occurring right now. Yet, every stage of the journey deserves recognition. The beginner learning their first sentences is progressing. The intermediate learner overcoming hesitation is progressing. The advanced learner refining communication skills is progressing. Growth exists at every level, provided movement continues. Outside the window, the lights of neighboring homes created a comforting scene. Each illuminated window represented another life, another story, another person moving through their own challenges and ambitions. The image reminded me that learning is ultimately a human experience. Behind every language learner is a unique individual hoping to connect more deeply with the world. Some want better career opportunities. Others want to travel confidently. Some hope to communicate with friends, while others simply enjoy the challenge of personal growth. Different goals may inspire the journey, but the desire for connection remains universal. The clock on the wall indicated that the evening was growing late. Normally, this would be the point when many people put away their books, close their applications, and end their study sessions. Yet I realized something important. The day had not been defined by study sessions at all. It had been defined by experiences. English had accompanied me through those experiences naturally and consistently. That realization reinforced the central lesson I hoped every learner would understand. Fluency grows fastest when language becomes woven into the fabric of daily life. I picked up my notebook and wrote a few thoughts about the day. Not because I needed to complete an assignment, but because writing allows ideas to become clearer. As the words appeared on the page, I noticed how much easier self-expression felt compared to years earlier. The improvement had not arrived through a single breakthrough. It had emerged gradually through thousands of small moments of practice, observation, communication, and reflection. The journey had been longer than I once expected, but it had also been far more rewarding. Another realization surfaced as I finished writing. Confidence is often misunderstood as certainty. In reality, confidence frequently means trusting yourself despite uncertainty. Even fluent speakers occasionally encounter unfamiliar vocabulary, confusing situations, or communication challenges. What changes is their response. Instead of viewing uncertainty as a threat, they treat it as a normal part of communication. This perspective allows them to continue moving forward without becoming trapped by fear. The room had grown even quieter now. My tea had cooled, the city lights shimmered softly beyond the window, and a sense of gratitude settled over me. Looking back on the day, I felt thankful not only for the progress I had made, but also for the opportunity to continue growing. Learning a language is not merely about acquiring knowledge. It is about expanding possibilities, building connections, and discovering new ways of understanding the world. As I prepared to end the evening, one final thought remained in my mind. Every lesson throughout the day had pointed toward the same truth. Fluency is not created through isolated moments of effort. It is built through consistency, curiosity, patience, and daily engagement. The language becomes stronger each time we welcome it into our lives. Tomorrow would bring new experiences, new conversations, and new opportunities to practice. But before looking ahead, there was one final reflection waiting to be explored. The journey from morning to night had revealed how English could become part of everyday life, and as I switched off the lamp and allowed the room to fall into darkness, I knew the final chapter would bring everything together into a single, meaningful conclusion. Silence filled the room after I switched off the lamp, yet my mind remained awake for a few moments longer. Beyond the window, the city lights shimmered quietly beneath the night sky, and the events of the day drifted through my thoughts like scenes from a familiar story. From the first rays of sunlight entering the kitchen that morning to the peaceful reflections of the evening, every experience had revealed a different aspect of language learning. What began as a simple day had gradually transformed into something much larger. It had become a reminder that English is not merely a subject to study. It is a living tool that can accompany us through every part of life. As I lay there reflecting on the journey, I realized how many ordinary moments had become opportunities for growth. Breakfast had taught us to connect language directly to actions. The morning walk had shown us how observation can transform the world into a classroom. The workplace had demonstrated the importance of communication and confidence. The quiet cafe had reminded us of the value of reflection and mindfulness. Conversations with friends had revealed practical strategies for improvement, while the evening reflections had explored identity, self-belief, and perseverance. None of these lessons existed in isolation. Together, they formed a complete picture of what natural language learning can look like. One of the most important ideas running through the entire day was the concept of integration. Many learners accidentally separate English from the rest of their lives. They assign it a specific place, a specific time, and a specific set of activities. Once the lesson ends, English disappears until the next study session begins. Yet true fluency develops when that separation gradually disappears. The language becomes woven into daily experiences. It accompanies thoughts, observations, plans, emotions, and conversations. Instead of existing outside life, it becomes part of life itself. I often think about fluency as a relationship rather than an achievement. Achievements are things we reach and then leave behind. Relationships, however, continue growing over time. The more attention, effort, and care we invest, the stronger they become. English is much the same. There is no magical finish line where learning suddenly ends forever. Even highly proficient speakers continue expanding vocabulary, refining communication skills, and discovering new expressions. Growth remains possible at every stage of the journey. This perspective transforms learning from a race into a lifelong companion. Another lesson that emerged repeatedly throughout the day involved consistency. Many people search constantly for secret methods, shortcuts, or revolutionary techniques that promise rapid results. While effective strategies certainly matter, the truth is often less dramatic. Progress usually belongs to those who continue showing up. Small efforts repeated consistently produce outcomes that occasional bursts of enthusiasm rarely achieve. 5 minutes of meaningful practice today may not seem impressive, but hundreds of such moments accumulated over months and years can completely transform a person's abilities. This realization connects closely to another important truth. Confidence is built, not granted. So many learners wait for confidence to arrive before speaking. They tell themselves they will participate more actively once they know more vocabulary, understand more grammar, or make fewer mistakes. Unfortunately, confidence rarely develops through waiting. It grows through action. Every conversation completed despite uncertainty strengthens confidence. Every successful interaction becomes evidence that communication is possible. Over time, these experiences create a foundation of trust in one's own abilities. I smiled as I remembered some of the doubts we had explored earlier in the journey. Questions such as, am I improving quickly enough, or will I ever become fluent, are remarkably common among learners. Yet those questions often overlook something important. Progress does not always announce itself loudly. Many of the most meaningful improvements occur gradually beneath the surface. Listening skills become stronger. Vocabulary becomes more accessible. Sentence structures become more familiar. The learner may not notice these changes immediately, but they are occurring nonetheless. Patience allows hidden growth to reveal itself. The phrase that had guided us from the very beginning returned to my thoughts once more. I am making progress every single day. Earlier, it served as a simple affirmation. Now it felt like a conclusion supported by evidence. Throughout the day, we had seen how progress can emerge through observation, reflection, communication, discipline, and daily engagement. The statement was no longer merely optimistic. It was realistic. Every moment spent interacting with the language contributes to development in some way. Progress may vary in speed, but consistent engagement ensures that movement continues. As I reflected further, I realized that language learning teaches lessons extending far beyond vocabulary and grammar. It teaches patience, because meaningful growth requires time. It teaches resilience, because mistakes and setbacks are unavoidable. It teaches curiosity, because communication begins with a desire to understand people and ideas. It teaches discipline, because consistent action matters more than temporary motivation. In many ways, learning a language becomes a form of personal development. The skills acquired along the way often improve other areas of life as well. Outside, the city had grown even quieter. Most windows were dark now, and the world seemed to be settling into rest. Yet I found comfort in knowing that somewhere, countless learners were continuing their own journeys. Some were just beginning to learn their first English phrases. Others were practicing conversations, reading books, listening to podcasts, or preparing for important opportunities. Although their experiences differed, they all shared a common goal. They were building bridges to new possibilities through language. What makes that journey so meaningful is not merely the destination. Of course, fluency creates opportunities. It can open professional doors, enable travel, expand friendships, and provide access to new knowledge. Yet the journey itself contains value. Every new expression learned, every conversation completed, and every moment of understanding creates a sense of growth that extends beyond language. Learners gradually discover that they are capable of more than they once believed. This realization often becomes one of the most rewarding outcomes of all. The longer I considered the events of the day, the more I appreciated the simplicity of the approach we had followed. There had been no pressure to memorize endless lists or force complicated grammar into every conversation. Instead, English had emerged naturally through experiences. We observed, described, reflected, communicated, and listened. The language served a purpose in each situation. This natural integration is what allows learning to feel sustainable over the long term. When practice becomes part of daily life, maintaining progress becomes significantly easier. I thought once more about the morning sunlight entering the kitchen many hours earlier. At the time, the day had felt ordinary. Looking back now, I could see how each moment had connected seamlessly to the next. One experience prepared the foundation for another. The breakfast routine led to observation. Observation led to communication. Communication led to reflection. Reflection led to deeper understanding. Step by step, the day had demonstrated that fluency is not built through isolated events. It is built through continuous engagement with the language across different situations and environments. Perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. English does not belong only in classrooms, textbooks, or study applications. It belongs wherever life happens. It belongs in kitchens, on sidewalks, in workplaces, in cafes, during conversations, and within quiet moments of reflection. The more places we allow English to exist, the more natural it becomes. Eventually, the language stops feeling like a visitor and begins feeling like a familiar part of our daily experience. A sense of gratitude settled over me as the final thoughts of the day drifted through my mind. I felt grateful for the lessons learned, the conversations shared, and the opportunities that language continues to provide. Most importantly, I felt grateful for the understanding that progress does not require perfection. It requires participation. Every learner who continues showing up, practicing, observing, and communicating is already moving forward. The journey may be long, but every step matters. With that thought, I finally allowed myself to relax completely. Tomorrow would bring another sunrise, another series of experiences, and another collection of opportunities to engage with English naturally. The journey was not ending. In many ways, it was only beginning. Yet as the room settled into complete darkness and the city rested beneath the quiet night sky, one truth remained perfectly clear. English had become more than a language. It had become a companion woven into everyday life, and that simple transformation held the key to lasting fluency, meaningful communication, and lifelong growth. As we reach the end of today's lesson, I want you to take a moment and appreciate yourself. The fact that you spent this time listening, learning, and improving means you are already moving forward. English fluency is not built in a single day, and it is not reserved for people with special talent. It is built one sentence at a time, one conversation at a time, and one lesson at a time. Every minute you invest in yourself today is bringing you closer to the confident English speaker you want to become. If there were moments in this lesson that felt difficult, that's completely normal. Growth often happens when we step slightly beyond our comfort zone. And if there were moments when you understood more than you expected, be proud of that progress. Those small victories matter more than you think. Keep showing up, keep listening, keep speaking, and most importantly, keep believing that improvement is happening even when you cannot see it immediately. I am truly grateful that you chose to spend part of your day learning with me. Our journey does not end here. In the next lesson, we will continue building your listening skills, speaking confidence, vocabulary, and natural fluency through another engaging real-life story. Each lesson is carefully designed to help you think in English more naturally and communicate with greater ease. If you enjoyed this lesson and want to continue growing with our learning community, please subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a comment below telling me where you are watching from and what your biggest English learning challenge is right now. I read your comments, and they help shape future lessons for this community. Thank you for being here. Thank you for investing in yourself. And remember, every day you practice English is another step toward the future you deserve. I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.